Okay, great. We're going to get started. I'm Naomi Firestone Teeter, JBC's Executive Director, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's discussion with Scott Shay, whose book, In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism, is the focus of today's conversation, which was just released in paperback last week. Congratulations, Scott.
Thank you.
As always, of course, we're so appreciative of you joining us here each week to celebrate authors of recently released books, and I hope you'll continue to join us for the series. You can find the upcoming lineup in the link that will be in the chat momentarily. Our mission at Jewish Book Council is to educate and enrich the community through Jewish literature. Visit jewishbookcouncil.org to learn about JBC's reviews, essays and literary journal, Paper Brigade, our book club resources and author tours, and our literary awards, including the National Jewish Book Awards. I hope you would check out all of our programs and resources, and that you might also consider becoming a member to support JBC's continued initiatives. This is our 10th installment of our Lunchtime series, and we hope you'll support today's author by purchasing a copy of his book, In Good Faith, using the link in our chat. On the screen, you can see the JBC team, and we'll all be chiming in with questions during the conversation. If any of you in the audience would like to share your own questions during the talk, you're more than welcome. Please just use the Q&A button, the feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Also, on the top right of your screen, you will have the option to view the discussion in gallery mode or speaker mode. Please choose whichever one you prefer. This week, I'm very pleased to introduce you to Carol Kaufman, our executive editor, who will be leading the discussion today along with my colleagues from the Jewish Book Council. Take it away, Carol.
Thank you so much, Naomi. Welcome everyone to our Authors at the Table event. And now I'd like to properly introduce Scott Shay. Scott A. Shay is a leading businessman, thought leader, and author of 2 widely read books. Scott co-founded Signature Bank in 2001. The bank has since become known as one of the best banks in New York for private business owners. Scott's second book, In Good Faith, Questioning Religion and Atheism, has been recognized as one of the best books of 2018 by Mosaic Authors, and was a finalist for the Jewish Book Council's National Jewish Book Awards. Scott gives talks around the country and is interviewed many times throughout the year on TV, radio, and podcasts. Welcome, Scott. It's such a pleasure to have you with us here today.
Thank you, Carol. It's good to be having a virtual lunch with you.
How are you, and where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining you from Signature Bank. We have been really busy since COVID happened. I've really been working 24/6, and we're considered an essential business. So we've stayed open during this entire time, and I'm working some days from the office and some days from home.
And how have your days changed since the COVID pandemic?
Well, with many of your listeners will have heard of the Paycheck Protection Program. So when that came out, we literally turned the bank upside down so that we could get every single application through. We had a slogan that only a banker could love: no compliant application left behind.
Scott,
and we succeeded.
Oh, sorry. I'd like you to tell us and your audience, our audience, a little bit about your book, In Good Faith. And first of all, what compelled you to write it?
So actually, the part that you've asked me to read a little bit, and I think that reading might give people an idea of why I wanted to write the book. And maybe that's a good lead-in.
Why don't you go ahead? We'd love to hear.
Since I proudly practice my Judaism, many Christian and Muslim friends, colleagues, and acquaintances over the years have felt comfortable sharing their personal views and doubts about their own religions with me, whether at the annual holiday party, often after one too many Heinekens, or even at a New York Knicks game, surely a test of anyone's faith in its own right, given their on-court performance in the last few decades. In the course of these conversations, I came to understand that people held one of 3 perspectives. The first perspective goes something like this: you seem like such a reasonable fellow. So how is it that you buy all this God stuff? Please don't tell me you believe in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy too. Or, come on, haven't we civilized moderns outgrown all of this? Or this. And the Bible is just so primitive and obscure. It is no longer relevant to educated adults. These people believe that the book Religion for Dummies should have been titled Religion is for Dummies. The second perspective sounds like this. I definitely believe in God, but I know it's completely irrational. It's as if they are confessing to parking their reason at the door because their hearts tell them to do so. And as if they agree there is no distinction to be made between belief in the God of Abraham and belief in superheroes, since most of them got their religious education from after school and Sunday school lessons that were about as convincing as infomercials. The third perspective is more like this. I think you can be a modern and educated. I think you can be modern and educated and religious. But the atheists are right. You don't necessarily need religion or God to be good. And frankly, some aspects of the Bible seem more than a little bit questionable to the modern reader. I count myself as a fellow traveler in this group, but it was not always so. So it was answering these questions that people would raise to me, clients, colleagues, and others, that started me on a quest to find a book I could recommend to them. They had already read The God Delusion or the Why God Isn't Great or Letter to a Christian Nation. And so I went on a search for a book, and I read I read a whole bunch of Karen Armstrong. I read a whole bunch of books by different authors, and I couldn't find a book that really, I thought, answered the tough questions. And so when you're at that place where you think something needs to be done and no one else has done it, I figured I'd try my hand at doing it myself. And that's how I started writing in good faith and how it became a 5-year plus writing project for me.
I noticed when I was reading the book, and even more when you were reading from it just now, your writing style is so conversational. And throughout the book, there are witty things and funny things, and particularly snappy chapter titles. How did you come to such a style? And tell us a little bit about your writing process.
So writing a book about
Most
God.
authors, by the way, would envy something with writing with such a natural flow.
Well, if I weren't a banker, by the way, I probably would have been a writer, but I was very attracted to banking from a pecuniary perspective and to business. I started out as a writer for my high school newspaper. I ended up editing it. I wrote for the Daily Northwestern when I was in college, and I love to write. So this is something that also writing for me scratches an itch as well. But I recognize that if writing a book about the Bible, writing a book about God and theology, it can be really heavy. And so I worked hard. As a matter of fact, the last year, it's interesting you ask about the writing process. It took about 4 years for me to write this book. And the last year, I basically spent just working on the writing. All the ideas were down. If you would have read it, you would have gotten everything that I wanted to say. But I wanted to keep the reader engaged. And that is, thank you for mentioning it, Carol, because that is something that people have remarked, that they were able to read this whole book and that it didn't ever seem like it was dragging.
So you definitely succeeded. And I commend you for it. Now I'm going to open up the questions from other staff members and from our audience.
Hi, Scott. I'm Evie. Hi, how are you? So you're a businessman, and obviously you've talked about writing, but you wrote this book on faith and religion. So how do you see faith tying into the business world?
So I think that's a great question. I believe in being a whole person. So To me, one of the central lessons of the Bible is the golden rule, which, as Hillel said it, don't treat someone else the way you wouldn't want to be treated yourself. The rest is commentary. Go learn it. So I'll give you an example, two examples from the business world. One, when we put out our standards of conduct as a bank, so, as a regulated financial institution, we put out this big, thick, 50, 60 page standards of conduct. So I took it upon myself to write the introduction of that standards and conduct. And if you look at it, it's in bold. It says, the first sentence says, this is a very long policy that you have to read. But if you keep one thing in mind, everything will go well for you ethically, which is, don't treat any client, colleague, counterparty, or anyone you come into contact with at Signature Bank in a way that you wouldn't want to be treated yourself. The rest of this booklet is commentary, but you have to read it. And that commentary, that introduction, a lot of people have referenced within the bank. And I'll give you a concrete example. I made a brief reference to the Paycheck Protection Program. When we first heard about it and first realized we were going to be essentially as a bank administering this, we heard other banks were prioritizing lending clients or bigger clients or private banking clients. I'm sure you read about this. This was all in the papers. What we did was different. We said, look, if we're a small shop on the Grand Concourse, or we're a little accounting firm on Northern Boulevard in the second floor over the shops, we would want to think that someone's really going to try to get us this PPP loan. And so we turned over our whole bank. We literally took 25% of my colleagues, the employees of the bank, and moved them to other jobs because we didn't want to outsource it. We thought we got to make sure this is right. So you could have been a senior vice president. We had senior vice presidents of the bank who basically became keyboard inputters. Everybody did what they needed to do. We turned over the whole bank so that everybody could get a PPP loan. And indeed, every single company, and actually even sole proprietorships that applied, got a loan and is hopefully going to get forgiven for the loan. And we totaled up, we were helpful in saving somewhere between 190,000 and 220,000 jobs. That's because we did everybody. So this sort of ethics has real practical applications.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Yeah, thanks for that, Scott. And I would love to talk about idolatry a little bit, which makes its way throughout the book quite frequently. And in particular, I found your discussion about AI technology, data, and social media and their implication for society absolutely fascinating. I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that for our readers and connect the dots.
So that's great. And I really appreciate it because idolatry and the issue of idolatry is really central to my book. And it really explains, I think idolatry explains what Harvey Weinstein and Chairman Mao and Charlie Rose and Hitler and Jeffrey Epstein and Pharaoh all had in common, which is they used idolatry to oppress either individuals or whole nations. So here's the thing. We bar and bat mitzvah grads usually think that idolatry is some quaint word about bowing down to statues or some weird Wiccan chants. But in reality, the Bible explains what idolatry really is, and it's much more dangerous. Idolatry is about ascribing superpower or super authority to finite beings, people like us, ideologies, or natural processes. So we may have thought that we licked the god King Pharaoh 3,300 years ago and we should drink 4 glasses of wine and we're done with it. But in reality, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, the Assad family, the Kim family, Hitler, it goes on and on, They use the same tropes of poetry, pageantry, theater, all, of course, with secret informers, secret police, and powerful armies to abuse people. How did Stalin end up killing all the kulaks, starving a quarter of the Ukraine, and sending tens of millions to the gulag? And nobody questioned him. Mao caused the death of 75 million of his Chinese comrades. At the same time, how did Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and Kevin Spacey and Matt Lauer, and the list goes on, get away with their abuse? Well, on a micro basis, on an intimate basis, they were able to fashion themselves as unquestioned and unquestionable idols within their industries. So whatever they said was truth. If Charlie Rose said that something was, it was. And that's literally how Stalin and these other folks worked. If they proclaimed truth, it was truth. And so what I try to do is explain how at a very deep level, idolatry is generally about self-deification or deifying some group. And it's the opposite of that golden rule that we talked before. I mean, Harvey Weinstein certainly didn't want to be treated the way he treated other people. And certainly Stalin wouldn't have wanted to have been starved or sent to the gulag. It's when you deify yourself for your ideology and you don't actually care about real people. And that's the lesson from the Bible over and over again. And I try to explain that.
What about the AI piece? I found that very interesting in your book. The new idols in our midst.
Well, there are definitely new idols in our midst, and I wrote some of that actually before Yuval Harari wrote his trilogy. Most of it was written before that, but I think Yuval Harari says it very clearly. Our new gods, he says, are going to come from Silicon Valley. So we tend to and we deal here at the bank and other financial institutions deal with models that use AI to tell you exactly what you ought to do. And in most cases, people follow exactly what the AI, what the artificial intelligence tells them to do, whether it be credit scoring. It tells banks whether or not to accept a loan, not accept a loan. And it's extremely dangerous because people actually don't know in many cases and can't know what's in the middle of the AI box. So here's how AI can work very dangerously. And there have been articles about this since I wrote the book, since the book was first published, which is if you come from a disadvantaged community and you have an AI algorithm analyzing whether or not a person should get a loan or doesn't get a loan, well, it may be analyzing people who AI will be analyzing people who you come in contact with, your social media feed. Indeed, some like SoFi asks for you to permission them so they can analyze your social media feed. And other fintech providers do that. So they may find that you are the first person in your family to go to college, that some people you deal with have defaulted. And if they find that you've had enough people who are within your social network, this is a long conversation, but if you tend to be involved with people who have defaulted, there's a higher chance that you'll default. But that means you'll be discriminated against or charged a higher interest rate without ever knowing it or even knowing why, or even the bank or the institution knowing why. And so people tend to bow down to the idolatry. They give it super authority, like I was talking about before. They don't believe it's a superpower, but they certainly give it super authority over people's lives. And that can ingrain discrimination and disadvantage certain groups when they shouldn't be.
Scott, I wondered if any of your ideas have changed or evolved since you finished the hardcover book, and in this time since it's come out in paperback, and have you made any revisions or changes to this new edition?
So I would say this, these ideas are in many cases from the Bible are timeless. And I didn't have the same vocabulary that people are using today, but mean, there are chapters there are subheadings in my book that with titles such as, is God a racist? Is God a colonialist? Is God genocidal? Are the Israelites imperialists just hiding behind God? So these same questions of social justice and recognizing the issues in our criminal justice system are there. I write in the book about comparing our grand jury system with the biblical system. So I was addressing some of these issues unselfconsciously, and again with a different vocabulary. But I've actually, in the last weeks, have had very, in some cases, deep conversations with individuals about how there is really no racism in the Bible, how the Bible takes criminal justice really, really seriously. And the prophets again and again, more than worry, they admonish power. They admonish people in power to treat others right. Martin Luther King's, at least he said that his favorite chapter in the Bible is Amos chapter 5. And you can't leave reading that chapter without thinking that it's speaking about today. It could be in the New York Times front page today. So these are ideas that, and the notion of liberation, the notion of fairness, the notion of justice are all biblical ideas. And I think that's not getting enough attention today. And I really find that the less people know about the Bible, the less they like it. But if they do engage with the Bible and with these ideas, they leave almost astounded.
Hi, Scott. Do you think you can share some advice for those embarking on their own journey and are just beginning to explore their relationship to faith and Judaism?
Yes. So I think that for each individual, and that's sort of why I titled the book In Good Faith, I think that you need to look at every individual needs to look at their life and the tenets they follow. And I think really the Bible can provide an inspiration because, as I try to explain in the book, what is the Bible? The Bible is essentially a series of people facing tests. Will they do the right thing? Will they do the wrong thing? And we see that time and time again, that it's only when Judah stands up to who he thinks is the viceroy, but in fact and additionally his brother Joseph, that he makes a hugely heroic decision. He's willing to be a slave himself for life to free his brother. When Moses recognizes that an Israelite slave is about to be killed by the taskmaster, and he literally throws away all the privilege that he has of being in the Pharaoh's palace and runs to Midian. He ends up being there for 40 years and he never thinks he's coming back. Or Esther, who puts everything on the line, and it goes on and on and on, where people face these tests. And I think what the Bible teaches us in many ways is that there are two important days in our life: the day we're born, when we're given the chance, and then the time when we find out why we're here on earth, what we're supposed to do, how we're supposed to make this planet a better place. And for me, and that's all about the last part of the book, section 6, which is trying to find our place and trying to have our own journey, and trying to align ourselves with, in a good faith sort of way, in a good faith way, how we can make this planet a better place. The flip side is, and I think the problem of this age is, that many people link themselves to bad faiths, to relying on taking people's word for stuff, to not engaging in their own self-examination, in their own search for evidence-based faith. And we see that, unfortunately, time and time again. And frankly, when that happens, people tend to link to idolatries, and then the real horrors in humanity happen.
Thank you.
Scott, I'm going to ask one more question from the audience before we wrap it up with Carol. So Eric Silverman says, hi, Scott. What was the research process like, and how long did it take before creating the first draft?
Oh my gosh. So what I did was I started out with an outline in terms of process, and I knew what the 6 sections were going to be. That took me some period of time. I honestly don't recall exactly how long, because I'd been noodling it for quite a while. And what I did was I wrote the sections section by section. Some sections required a lot of research. Some sections, like the section on science in the Bible, the science contradict the Bible, I'd been wanting to write that book for that section for 20 years. So that mostly came right out. But the 5th section on the historicity of the Bible required that I learn a whole new arena of archaeology that I hadn't been as familiar with. And I had to learn what the minimal centrists and maximalists all thought. That section alone took me a year of research. So it varied tremendously.
Scott, you mentioned 4 hopes in your book that you want your readers to take away from reading it.
Yes.
Can you share those with us?
Yes. So, every writer has hopes. So I'm not trying to convince anybody to become a believer. What my hopes are that people start reading the Bible, taking it seriously and recognizing it for what it was and is, and what its relevance is today. I hope that people will learn to recognize idolatry, because I do think it creates huge horrors. I hope that for believers or non-believers, that people will take a different look in recognizing how we can harmonize our whole beings and our whole understanding of being a modern and being a religious person of faith. I think they're totally reconcilable. And lastly, I hope, I'm not saying this exactly in the book, but it's the same idea, exactly the same ideas. My final hope is that I think people will look at the evidence of God, and I'm not trying to convince them, but I think they will recognize that there's a great deal of rationality, and belief in God can actually be a tremendous source of help in understanding the world, understanding ourselves, and in scholarship.
Scott, that's all the time we have today, unfortunately, but thank you so much for being here today. And audience, please be sure to check out a link to buy his book, In Good Faith, in our chat. We'll see you here next week when we sit down with Rachel Beeland, author of Florence Adler Swims Forever. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
Scott, thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you for having me.
So interesting. Thank you.
Our pleasure.